for the debate now. They say multiculturalism has failed. They say mass immigration is a threat to national identity. They say globalisation has destroyed the economy. They don't trust the European Union or their own elected leaders. This is the modern face of the far right, a populist political movement that is sweeping Western Europe. This weekend, 1 in 5 French voters chose the National Front, and its leader, Marine Le Pen, who you can see here, is the perfect example of how the far right has moved from the fringe to the mainstream. And take a look at this. In Sweden, in Belgium, in Austria, in Italy, in the Netherlands and elsewhere, the far right has made it into parliament. And in Switzerland, and until yesterday in the Netherlands, they were in government. So, what is behind this lurch to the right in Europe? And is this a trend set to continue? Joining me to discuss tonight is David Hanley. He's a professor of European politics at the University of Portsmouth. He's also a professor at the CEVIF Prof here in Paris. On my left, Jacqueline Hénard is a writer and political analyst at the Serry Institute. She specialises in German policy. We're also joined tonight by Laurent Chambon. He's a political analyst based in the Netherlands. He's also the founder of the magazine Minorité. Good evening to you. And in Athens tonight, Tarsi Petropoulos is the chief editor of Athens News, giving us the view from Greece as well. Good evening to you all, and thanks for being with us. All right, I'll kick things off with you then, David. The far-right parties across Europe, they come in many different shapes and sizes, don't they? But there are some defining characteristics, as I mentioned earlier. Would you care to elaborate on that somewhat?
Yes, there are differences between, I think, the ones in Northern Europe and Southern Europe, basically. I think the ones in Southern Europe have much more of a cultural or identity basis. You know, they're obsessed with who's French and therefore who isn't, and, you know, how one preserves this idea of Frenchness or, you know, Greekness or Italianness or whatever it is. But where they perhaps join the kind of homologues in the north, and where the ones in Southern Europe really take off, is when, on top of this kind of cultural basis, you get a serious amount of economic discontent, which they can capitalise on. And they then tend to say to voters, the reason why you're struggling, you know, in the globalised economy is because you're not being looked after by politicians who are really French or Italian or whatever. If you had people like us who were true patriots, we would run things differently, and all your economic and social woes would be swept away. All right. So it's when you get the mixture of the culture and the kind of economic discontent that these parties really begin to take off.
There's two strands that they're feeding on, if you like. And that's right, isn't it, Jacqueline? A lot of anger is being directed at the European Union, and a lot of people see these austerity measures being imposed upon them, and they're having to live, once again, with rules brought in by foreigners.
Yes, I agree with you. And somehow, I don't know. I mean, David, when you say that it's rather a Southern European phenomenon, that this obsession with identity, when you look at somebody like Breivik, obviously this is not a political movement, but it is a North European obsessed with matters of identity and foreigners coming and taking over life in the society and the functioning of the society. I'm not sure whether there is really an intention of taking over power. I mean, if you look at the French Front National, so far taking over power and participating in power was not their defining moment. It was rather just being a troubleshoot, being lots of trouble to everyone. And there is a country that sort of sticks out in the middle of your map, and in the way it works, it is Germany, that does not have a far-right party that is really present for obvious historical reasons. But nevertheless, there have been racially motivated murders by a terrorist movement that is connected to the far right in Germany. And what is most remarkable is that these murders, they stretched over 10 years. And the link between these different murders was discovered only very late.
All right, let's go to Southern Europe. You brought up Northern and Southern Europe. Tarsi Petropoulos is in Athens tonight. Of course, Greece suffering extreme economic hardship at the moment as a result of austerity measures being imposed upon it. There is a particularly nasty extreme right group in Greece, isn't there? They're called the New Dawn. Their leaders deny the Holocaust ever happened. They want to plant bombs on the border with Turkey. They want to deport illegal immigrants immediately. This is the kind of thing they're talking about. Are they managing to take advantage of the economic situation?
Well, it looks as if they're going to get into Parliament in the elections that are coming up in just over a week's time. You need 3% to get into the Parliament here, and they're polling, in the opinion polls, they're polling up to 5%, which is extraordinary. When we had our, let's say, right-wing, quite far right-wing party, Laos, join the coalition government here, eyebrows were raised, and it's gone to jaws dropping that Khaleesi Avier translates as Golden Dawn, most probably will find themselves in Parliament. The list goes on as to rhetoric which really most people think shouldn't have any place in a modern democracy, and yet because of the mixture of the acute economic difficulties and acute immigration difficulties, it looks very much as if they're going to get into Parliament.
Laurent Chambon, perhaps you'd like to come in here. A recurrent theme among these parties is the outright rejection of multiculturalism. They say it hasn't worked, it's ruining the economy, and as David Henley pointed out, it's undermining cultural identity as well.
Well, it's their theme actually, but if I want to be a little more back to the basic, I would say the core business of this extreme right is two things. First is the growing inequalities, so the economic problem that comes back regularly, and the second thing is that they're against the system. We have to imagine that we're now in a Europe where people have never studied so much and we've never been so much educated, and we have the internet, and still we have this elitist representative democracy that is completely failing. So extreme right is actually enjoying the fact that it's politic chaos around economy and the identity to prosper. But if we had other movement that could use these problems, so mostly economy and the death of our state of democracy, to do something else, to propose something else than just identity and something against Islam, I'm sure it could work very hard. When you look, for example, in Holland, the SP, the extreme left, is rising enormously, and we've seen besides Marine Le Pen, there was Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who is also the extreme left, who has also become very popular in the last month. So I wouldn't say that the main thing is about identity. I would say it's about material things, but the extreme right is selling it as identity problem and a problem with foreigners.
Well, this is what's interesting, isn't it, David Hanley? Because you've got on social issues, they're extremely right-wing, but on economic issues, they pick up left-wing rhetoric. They talk about state protectionism, about unions and keeping the country's financial resources in the country. This is a new development over the past 10 years, isn't it?
Well, yeah, but if you look at the discourse on the economy, it has wandered round quite a bit. I mean, the Front National in France, 15 years ago, when neoliberalism was all the rage and, the economy seemed to be flourishing a bit everywhere, they were the biggest liberals and deregulators on the known earth. Now, today, they've gone around 360 degrees and they're the biggest statist, so, Colbertism and then some. I think, this shows that, well, how shall we say, they're extremely flexible, if not to say opportunistic, on the economy. I mean, I do think that you've probably got to distinguish between two generations in these bodies. Certainly in the Front National, there's the old-timers like Le Pen Senior and some of the guys whose memories go back to either Algérie Française or Vichy and the collaboration. And these guys bring a whole load of ideological baggage with them. Most of them don't think that the Nazis were too bad. They think that the Vichy regime was okay. And really, they're in favour of an authoritarian, old-fashioned right where people know their place. But with ideas like that, they were never going to get into power. And this picks up with what Jacqueline was saying. And it's quite true, I think, that old Le Pen's generation weren't that interested in power. They were trouble faits, as we'd say in English vulgarly. They were having a laugh, basically, up to a point. But I think the 40-year-olds who surround Marine Le Pen, they're much more hard-headed. They want to get power, and they see that the economic crisis is a way for them to get back into the political system, or rather get into the political system, because they've never really been in it. And, by posing as the defenders of the losers in globalisation, this is their way in. They haven't given up on a lot of the identity stuff, but they don't perhaps hold it with the same degree of intensity that the previous generation did.
Is that something you agree with, Laurent Chambon? They used to be on the fringe. There used to be a protest vote. Now they are building on the support they have, and they are very serious about getting into power.
Yes, actually, when you look at Northern Europe, especially Denmark with Pia Kjærsgaard or Holland with Geert Wilders, you see that they're really ready for power. And what they did is they support minority governments where they leave the regular right having to make decisions, and they push their own agenda, which is mostly against immigration. And so at the end, they do get some of the power, but they never got really in the power, mostly also because they cannot give any enough people to become minister or things like that. So I think that Marine Le Pen will probably do the same. She will use the fact that the UMP, the party of Nicolas Sarkozy, has weakened to somehow have a coalition with them, let them have measures against immigration, and enjoy the fact that they're not entirely in power. So what we've seen in Holland and Denmark will probably happen in France.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. There's hardly any of these parties has ever been in serious power, unless you could maybe count the Lega Nord in Italy, and in some ways that isn't quite like some of these other parties. But what they have been is, as you say, they've been either very vocal oppositions, or else they've been kind of on the edges of power, like in Denmark or in Holland, supporting centre-right governments, really, and watching these governments get into a mess and then hoping to pick up the pieces.
And that, of course, depends on how willing the government in power is to negotiate with them. I mean, you've seen it here in France, of course, Nicolas Sarkozy going all out to win over far-right voters. Now, quite simply, because it's a matter of numbers.
Well, actually, I mean, it did work 5 years ago. He did win over all these voters from the far right, and somehow he lost them again. And that's the real problem, because the fears and the lack of feeling that there's a future for them, this is what sort of pushes voters away from the traditional parties. And I can see that if you go elsewhere in France than Paris and big cities, you will see pockets of poverty, and these pockets of poverty, they frequently coincide with areas of fear, and that is where you have lots of voters for the extreme right or people who will be ready to vote for the extreme right.
And which countries in Europe do you think are most receptive to this kind of extreme right politics?
I'd be tempted to ask the question the other way around and say which ones aren't. And you probably start in the West there. You'd start with Ireland, which is the least receptive, and then probably the UK. And then, the further south you move, the more receptive they would become. Now, there are reasons for this. I mean, there are some very simple reasons why, if you compare France and Britain, for instance, why the BNP never does very well in Britain, whereas it does in France. And do you know what the main one is? The electoral system. Yeah. Basically.
Right. The first past the post system as opposed to proportional representation.
Yeah, you see, one of the great things about the French electoral system with two ballots, I mean, there's no other serious developed democracy has a two-ballot system. France is the only place that does. It means in the first ballot, and this is true of presidential and legislative elections, voters have a tremendous opportunity to vote with their heart, or to frankly lash out and give people a kicking. And one very good way of doing this is to vote for either a party of the hard left, like Mélenchon, or the Trotskyites even, or, if you're the other way inclined, on the right. And this enables people to purge their anger and, quote, send a message to the main parties of either the centre-right or centre-left. Then, that's fine, but a fortnight later, you have to vote realistically. But it is a powerful exutoire, as you say in French. It's a powerful way of getting rid of your feelings. In Britain, there's no such chance. I mean, there's only one ballot, and the two major parties control that ballot. So people like the BNP, they do get higher votes when the electoral system allows it, which is for the European elections, because then people can, it is a kind of PR system basically, and people can vote for them then, and they got 2 elected last time. But for elections that matter, really in Britain, the electoral system makes very sure that these people can't express themselves.
Right, and it's a similar situation in Germany as well, the way the electoral system's
The electoral system is a bit different, but nevertheless, I mean, the far-right movements have made it into parliament in 2 Länder and 2 regions in Germany. Other than that, they sort of come up occasionally, but they do not really get represented, and they are very far away from power.
And maybe you could tell us what the situation is in Greece, Tarsi Petropoulos.
Well, you've got to remember that it wasn't the far right that brought the immigration issue to these elections in the first place. It was actually the technocrat-led government. It wasn't actually Lucas Papadimos, the Prime Minister, who did it, but as soon as he stepped aside and said to the mainstream politicians, you take over and now run this election campaign, the government ordered a sweep of central Athens, where the majority of undocumented migrants were taken away. They're going to be put in, we're being told, up to 30 detention centres around the country. We have to see how that's going to pan out. But the point is that the majority of migrants, illegal migrants that enter Europe, enter it through Greece. And at some stage, Europe is going to have to tackle this problem, because Greece fundamentally is not able to tackle it. About 300 immigrants a day are coming in, mostly through the northeast and the border with Turkey. We're estimating that about 1 million undocumented migrants here. It's swelling and swelling, and you can see the reaction against it. It's very natural, and it's to be expected. And until, I'd say, Europe tackles this problem, it's only going to grow and grow here. It's pretty clear.
This is a common rallying cry, if you like, by the far right, isn't it? They say, look, Europe and the traditional leaders are not talking about the things we're worried about. They won't talk about immigration, particularly in the more social democratic countries in Scandinavia. It's not politically correct. We get accused of being racist. Is this driving their popularity as well?
To an extent, yeah. I mean, undoubtedly, there's a widespread perception among most West European populations that immigration is a problem. And when jobs are in short supply, immigrants tend to be perceived as the reason why there are no jobs. We know for a fact that it isn't true. I mean, you know, I don't know if you ever saw Evan Davis's programme for BBC about the job situation in the east of England and immigrants taking jobs there. I mean, the examples he found disproved this conclusively. I mean, basically, the British people didn't want to do the jobs.
It's about perception, isn't it?
But it's all about perception.
People's fears and perceptions.
Exactly, yeah.
All right, let's take a short break. When we come back, we will pick up on those issues again for you. Don't go away. We'll come back. We'll have the international headlines and the second part of tonight's debate.
It's one of the poorest regions of France. Unemployment is at a record high. But with the discovery of massive oil deposits off its coast, things in French Guiana are looking up. First there was the space centre in Kourou, then the discovery of gold in the jungle, now it's black gold that's fueling the Guyanese dream. But will the people reap the benefits? Reporters, Thursday, 9:45 p.m. Paris time, on France 24.